You have reached the deepest depths of the internet. If it is greatness you seek, you've come to the wrong show. If it's about not wasting time, don't worry, you're never going to get your time back. If it's knowledge you seek, just be aware, any knowledge gained here is going to be minuscule. So now it's time for Accost the Field with Tony Gerdeman on the Ozone Radio Network. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Accost the Field. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, are you doing well today, or are you doing not well?
I'm doing extremely well. I'm glad that there's actually a football game to talk about, because I wasn't really particularly interested in revisiting the Purdue game for another week. So, hooray, we get to talk about Nebraska.
Well, I mean, we could, spend time talking about what the team did during the off week to get better and to improve on where they needed to improve. And I shouldn't be making light, because we are actually going to talk about that in a little bit, because there's really nothing else to talk about. We write these articles and you see the comments and people are angry, and it's just, all we're writing about is what the players and the coaches are saying. And, we have to relay something to you. It's our job to relay these things to you, and people are like, I guess understandably, or maybe not understandably, but like angry at, I'm tired of hearing about them working on it. This is week 8, week 9. They should have this or that solved. And that's all true. But these are things that also need to be said by the coaches and players, because at this point, that's all they're going to say. And Tom, people just need to get off of our backs about it, basically.
Well, yeah, you get complained at when you write about what the players and coaches are saying. So then I write about the college football playoff, and then people get mad about that because this isn't a playoff team, and nobody's saying they're a playoff team. I'm just writing about the college football playoff. That's it. So you could tell maybe the most significant indication of where this team is and where sort of the mentality surrounding this team is came during interviews Tuesday night with questions that weren't asked. Normally you get questions about guys going home and so what'd you do over your break? And, the guys from Florida all went back to Florida. The guys from Texas went to Texas, or whatever. And I didn't hear, I was on 2 of the 3 interviews. I didn't hear any questions about, so what'd you do over your break? It was all football, all focus on how, what have you been doing to improve? What have you seen out of Nebraska and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, with the college football playoff poll coming out on Tuesday night, that Tuesday set of interviews is always an opportunity for reporters to ask the players, what do you think about where you're going to be, where do you think Ohio State should be, blah blah blah. I didn't hear any of those questions Tuesday night. Did you? Did anybody ask about the playoffs?
No, nobody asked about them, and the interviews stretched long enough that the rankings had come out before those interviews were over. So there was an opportunity, and I didn't hear anyone actually ask that question. Because I don't, what are they gonna say? Like, yeah, I mean, wherever they are, I just looked a minute ago, but I mean, as I wrote on Tuesday morning, they could be anywhere from 7th to 15th, and it doesn't really matter. If they handle their business, they have a pretty good chance of getting in, and if they don't handle their business, it doesn't matter. So don't sweat those initial rankings too much, because the committee's kind of got a history of not really sticking to its established criteria and having a consistent criteria from week to week anyway. So don't spend a ton of time sweating those.
So Ohio State opens 10th in the initial college football playoff poll, and really that's all the time we need to spend on it. It's almost too much time. We'll spend more time on it when it matters, which would be after the Michigan game, before the Michigan game, all around that time. Until then, we'll put that on the back burner and still probably mention it each week, just because we have to. But it's not something that you need to kick your dog over or anything like that. Just, it's no big whoop. It's just something for people to talk about. And since Ohio State fans really don't have that, you can still talk about it, but maybe with some hushed tones and and not be so vociferous. Although, as we'll talk about later on, um, if they win out, I really do believe they'll be okay. But in order to win out, Tom, the Buckeyes have to get their defense fixed. That's the missed tackling. That's the stop giving up big plays. Offensively, they have to be able to run the ball, and they have to score in the red zone, score touchdowns in the red zone. And that's what the bye week was spent doing. Urban on Tuesday's Big Ten coaches teleconference sounded pretty confident that they have the missed tackles fixed and the big plays fixed as well in that. But they spent a lot of time over the last week working on that. But what concerns me is Greg Schiano mentioned they missed 20 tackles against Purdue. Prior to that, they were one of the best, in his words, one of the best tackling teams in the nation. And that's not just something they say. They have stats that show these things. But Tom, if the missed tackles are the reasons for the big plays, and they were one of the top tackling teams before the Purdue game, but still giving up these big plays, they could tackle pretty well against Nebraska. But if they still give up the home runs, where are we?
You're exactly where you've been all year, which is a good tackling team that generally tackles people pretty well when they have people around to take correct angles and be in the correct spots, but frequently they are not in the correct spots, and frequently they do not take good angles, and therefore you see the backs of opposing players streaking down the field more often than you would like to see. So they fixing the tackling would be a good first step to making a Purdue game not happen again, but there are other deeper issues that they are supposedly have spent the last couple weeks trying to address as well.
Jordan Fuller said Tuesday there's an increased emphasis on angles and taking the right angles and being in the right spots to head for those tackles. And these are things that the coaches are expecting to be evident. Jordan Fuller said he saw improvements throughout practice in that regard. We'll see on Saturday because Nebraska's offense can do some different things, and they have players where the Buckeyes are going to need to be sound tackling, and they're going to have the right angles. Although I don't know if they really want right angles. I don't know if you need that, but proper angles to bring these guys down, and we'll see if that works. Urban also seemed to think that the offense would be better on the ground, mainly because of attitude and a renewed maybe anger, but mostly he said, it's the attitude that got adjusted with some new added scheme things. He didn't go into detail on what those were. But one of the other things that he said before is the running backs have to start running harder, and I believe that as well. We talk about how the running backs have no big runs, but when they do get to that second level, on the rare occasions they do, they get tackled, Tom. So I don't think it's just the offensive line, although that's a huge part of it. But the running backs could they could help themselves more than they have been, I think.
When the offense and the running game is as bad as it's been compared to where it has historically been, there's plenty of blame to go around. It's the offensive line is not doing its job particularly well. The running backs are not doing their jobs as well as they have in the past. The tight end blocking has not been as good as the standard is at Ohio State. The offensive line, the first 4 games of the season, 19 of 20 times, an offensive lineman was named a champion, was graded out as a champion. The last 4 games, 5 out of 20 times that it was possible, it's happened. So I think that still tells you kind of where a lot of the issue lies.
I was thinking earlier in the week, or late last week, I guess now, has Ohio State become, I always viewed Texas, not always, but in the last, 7-8 years, I viewed them as a soft program where, they get to Texas and, the whole, you wake up on third base thinking you hit a triple. They've become entitled. Same thing that, I don't know, not necessarily entitled at Clemson, but when they, the whole Clemsoning thing, where you just knew at some point they were going to fail. And I'm wondering if Ohio State has become that, where they are a soft program, and everybody waits for that one game now where they just completely tank, and now they're out of it, and it's happened 3 years in a row. And I guess you could even talk about 2013 with Michigan State, 2015 with Michigan State, where Ohio State could go undefeated, or they could be 8-0, 9-0, but at some point people just expect them to not have enough, or to fail on the road, or to not. I mean, the way they're running the ball right now, they certainly seem soft. But do you, as Ohio State, is this the softest Ohio State program you've seen? And have you seen it growing more friendly over the last few years?
It does seem like there isn't quite the same. I don't know if it's attitude or. I mean, you can kind of assign soft things to what you're seeing on the field rather than hard technical things, and it's the will to win and all that kind of stuff that sort of gets retroactively assigned after losses or after poor performances. But I do think that running the football is kind of an attitude thing, and you'll hear players and coaches talk about that. We've heard players and coaches talk about that. So if you have the talent on your offensive line and in your running back room and your coaching staff that is being paid as if they're a premier coaching staff in the nation, and you can't do that, it certainly, I think, is fair to question that. Now, I don't know if this is soft like Texas has been. I mean, Texas went like a decade without having an offensive lineman drafted. That's not been the case at Ohio State. This has been a down year on the offensive line for Ohio State, but that you can maybe chalk some of that up to the injuries to Brady Taylor and Brandon Bowen. And I'm going to be interested to see what that line looks like if and when those guys come back. I'll be interested to see, I mean, everything this weekend with the defense, with the offense, because I think you're going to have a pretty good sense before halftime on Saturday whether all the happy talk about how the defense is close and the defense has made great improvements and the offense is going to, have a new attitude and be able to run the ball. You're going to have a pretty good sense pretty early on Saturday how much validity there is to all of that, because it's real easy to happy talk it right now, but if they come back out and run for 3.5 yards per carry against Nebraska, then I mean it's already a problem, and at that point it becomes maybe a fatal problem.
And Urban Meyer has said that Ohio State is an offensive line-driven program. That's where they get their identity. And if the problem is the offensive line not being aggressive enough, then that's the identity of your program as well. And I think that's part of the problem right now. That being said, if they right the ship and they get that attitude adjusted like they believe they have, and they come out and start pounding people, which I'll believe it when I see it at this point. But if they do and they win out, Tom, I still think they're in the playoffs. And the 29-point loss to Purdue is bad. I think the 31-point loss to Iowa will still be on people's minds because they've seen this is no fluke. This Purdue game isn't a fluke because it happened last year as well. Now they're only supposed to look year by year. But it's kind of like, with the jury, strike that from your mind. It's hard to do that. So I think there's going to be some, even if they win out, there's going to be some thought about, obviously, the Purdue game, but then the Iowa game as well. Do you want to put a team in there that is capable of laying these eggs? But when you look at where, the way things stand right now, you've got two SEC teams in the top four, and that likely won't be the case, possibly, at the end, depending on what happens with Notre Dame and Clemson. But I think the Big Ten champion will be there, even if it's Ohio State, if it's Michigan, if it's Ohio State or Michigan. I think I think they're okay even with that big loss to Purdue. What about you?
I will believe that a one-loss Big Ten champion gets left out for a second SEC team or a two-loss conference champion from another league. I'll believe that when I see it. It's possible. There are all sorts of scenarios where Ohio State just doesn't, finishes fifth because Alabama won out and Oklahoma won out and Notre Dame won out and Clemson won out. And that Purdue loss gets just hung around their neck like a millstone, and that keeps them as the fifth team instead of one of the top four. But if you have one of those teams is going to lose. I mean, that's just the reality of college football is just when you think that you know where everyone is and how, where everyone really stacks up, teams will lose games they should not lose. And every year there's sort of this assumption that, it hasn't happened this year because everyone has lost already, basically. But there's always this conversation this time of year, is this the year that 6 teams finish undefeated? And no, of course it's not, because it never is. A lot of the teams ahead of them have to play each other. Alabama and LSU play this weekend. One of them's going to have another loss. If it's LSU, that's their second loss and they're basically out. Georgia and Kentucky play this weekend. One of them's going to have a second loss. They're going to basically be out. It's certainly possible that the SEC, if, say, Georgia wins out and Alabama wins out and Georgia beats Alabama in the big SEC championship, it's certainly possible that you could have 2 SEC teams get in. I've said for weeks on that college football playoff situation update that I do on Sundays, assume that Alabama is in every year until they're not. I don't necessarily think that this Georgia team is good enough to beat Alabama, but it's college football. Any given Saturday, you never know what can happen, and it's a college football playoff committee. You can never say never with them because they've shown that there's not a whole lot of they don't feel particularly bound to previous their justification in previous years carrying over to the current year. If they did, then Alabama either shouldn't have made it in 2017 or Ohio State should have made it in 2015 because that was pretty egregious last year.
They're always setting new precedents and not necessarily following old ones. I do think that if there is a conference championship game loser that does make it for the first time, it would be Alabama, just because they get the benefit of every doubt. And this would be another one of those benefits of being Alabama. It's like, yeah, well, they lost, but we still know, Tom, that they're the best team. I mean, come on, they're Alabama. And, this is a Herculean effort by Georgia to beat them. So give Georgia credit, but come on, it's Alabama. And so I could see Alabama getting in there if there's arguments. But like you said, a one-loss Big Ten champ, until it happens, it can't happen, basically. But then with this committee, be careful trying to throw down absolutes. But that's a long time down the road. We know that, as I mentioned, we don't need to start talking about it until Michigan. But I see a lot of people already out there saying Ohio State has no chance if they win out. Tom and I know a lot about stuff, and we both disagree with you. So take our word for the weight that it carries and the importance. Tom, how much importance is that? Do we carry?
On a scale of 1 to 10, at least a 17, maybe more.
Yeah, and I think you're really undervaluing us, but that's because we're humble and we have humility. Hey.
The real question that I'm really excited about with the college football playoff is if Notre Dame loses once and misses out because they don't play in a conference championship game and Brian Kelly turns all purple with rage, is that what finally drives Notre Dame to join a conference? Because I could completely see that happening. Because theoretically, a conference championship is supposed to be basically the first criteria that the playoff committee considers. So they can get in undefeated without that. If they're 11-1 and there are a whole bunch of other 11-1 teams and they get left out, I will be more excited for the Notre Dame reaction than I am to see where Ohio State finishes in the playoff rankings, because that could be pretty spectacular.
Yeah, I agree. It would be their own fault. And you know, if you want to put them in, go ahead, but give them the ACC slot. Take out Clemson or whomever. You know, because they're essentially an ACC team. They play 5 ACC games every year. You can't give them this free reign, even though they're attached to the ACC and but they don't play in a championship game, but they get the benefits of playing those teams. If they don't have that conference championship or that 12th win, which pretty much everybody needs, then you know what? I'm sorry. If there's benefits and there's detriments to being in a conference championship game. If you lose it, you're pretty much screwed. If you win it, that gives you the extra credit you need to get the nod. And Notre Dame, they don't need it until they need it. And if they go undefeated, they don't. If they don't go undefeated, they do. And nobody's going to cry a tear for them. And I do wonder, as much as Brian Kelly will want, that opportunity for a conference championship game, you have all of these snooty Notre Dame people that just love being independent, even though they are as independent as like your 30-year-old son who lives in the boathouse, out back, in the guest house. Yeah, he's independent, but he's still on your property, and he still eats dinner with you, or he's raiding your pantry, but you don't always see him. So yeah, he's independent, but he's not really. And that's Notre Dame. Yeah, they're independent, but they have to rely on the ACC to give them quality games and to give them scheduling boosts. So, it'll be interesting to see, at what point they decide, what, we do need to make the move, and how that trigger what we've talked about before, not on the show, but just in general, the 16 team super conferences. Will that finally be what gets that ball rolling? Because I think that's coming, but then you also have the TV contracts, and it's going to be a pretty interesting next, 7, 8, 10 years in college football. And I've been okay with the changes so far. You just wonder at what point do the changes become bad.
The changes become bad right around the time the Big Ten adds Rutgers and Maryland. That's when the changes become bad. So the changes become bad, what was that, 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
Touche.
That's when.
So what more damage can we do?
What else could possibly go wrong? How much worse could this possibly be?
Well, and that's a great segue for the Nebraska game. Because, we were talking before the show. We haven't seen a great deal of Nebraska. We've seen them here and there. Adrian Martinez, the freshman quarterback, they're getting their running game going with running back Divino Zigbo. Everybody mostly knows about their receivers, Stanley Morgan, J.D. Spielman, who everybody should remember from last year as a freshman. I think he had 200 yards receiving. They've got their defense is getting better, but they've given up a ton of big plays. Going through their press conference on Monday, going through the transcription of that, as people are asking the linebackers questions about tackling and big plays, I wanted to put together all of these quotes and leave them vague and be like, these are not from Ohio State players. They're talking about, how do you clean up the big plays? And because I guess they gave up some big plays last week to Bethune-Cookman, which should give J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber some hope that maybe this is the week. But Nebraska has gotten better. They're 2-6 overall. They're 1-4 in conference play. Won their last 2. They almost won. They almost beat Colorado to open the season. They lost 33-28. They lost to Troy 24-19. Michigan blew them out. They lost to Purdue by 2 touchdowns. At Wisconsin by 17. They blew the game at Northwestern 34-31. They had that game won. Then they blew out Minnesota and blew out Bethune-Cookman. So this is a team that is finally, I guess, buying in. And what Scott Frost said this week is that what he'll remember most about this team is that they never quit. They always kept fighting. And I think we'll see that on Saturday. And this is not the same team that Buckeye fans have seen the last couple of years with blowouts and things like that. Even though maybe the Buckeyes should blow a team out, we can't even say that anymore. I'm expecting a game where, yeah, maybe Ohio State wins by 17, but I don't see them stopping Nebraska's offense, especially with Adrian Martinez being such a dual threat and a good passer, along with being a good runner. They have a lot of pieces that pose problems to the Buckeyes, and we're going to see how well they fixed their problems this week, and we'll see it early on Saturday.
This is a team that you wanted to get early in the year. Michigan had them in the perfect spot on the schedule. They had them in early September. I think it was the same weekend that Ohio State played Rutgers. And Scott Frost had not yet gotten his system completely installed, and probably still doesn't have it completely installed, but it's more installed now. And Adrian Martinez, as a true freshman, was extremely raw then. He's obviously got a lot more experience now, and he's still a true freshman, so there's still a long way for them to go, but they're a substantially more dangerous team now than they would have been 2 months ago. So you have to be concerned about J.D. Spielman, who, like you said, had 200 yards, 11 catches, 200 yards, and a touchdown last year against an Ohio State defense that did not give up 200 yards very often. Spielman had 9 catches, 209 yards, and a touchdown against Wisconsin just a few weeks ago. I mean, this is not a great Wisconsin team, but it's an okay Wisconsin team. So you certainly have stuff like that you can, if you're looking for something to be concerned about, and you probably are, that's something you can be concerned about. And I mean, you mentioned Nebraska getting gashed for big plays. In the S&P Plus team profiles, they have a stat called isolated points per possession, which is basically or points per play, sorry. It's ISO PPP. And it basically is a measure of how badly you're doing against explosive plays by the other offense. And Nebraska is terrible. Nebraska is 106th in the country in that metric. And they're also 20 spots ahead of Ohio State. So this is the irresistible force against the extremely, extremely movable object on both sides of the ball for both of these teams. So it'll be interesting. If like we've said, you are going to know very quickly, I think, how much better this defense is. If they're even a little shaky, Nebraska can probably take advantage of that. And I mean, Jordan Fuller talked tonight on Tuesday night about Spielman and playing against Spielman last year. And Fuller said he was the nickel a lot last year, so he was on Spielman a decent amount. And he said he's fast and he's quick. He's a very, very dangerous player. And so people asked him, so what would you tell people, or what would you tell guys who have to cover him? And it was kind of like, yeah, he's good, he's dangerous. It's like, well, that's not particularly helpful advice, but it's truthful, but not necessarily helpful.
Not a great coach, Jordan Fuller. Ohio State has given up 13 plays of 40 yards or more, scrimmage plays. Nebraska has given up 14. So they're very similar. Nebraska has given up 40 plays of 20 yards. Ohio State has given up 42. So that should give Ohio State fans some hope. Nebraska has gotten a great deal of hope from the Purdue game, and they talked about that this week, speaking with reporters about, and the most telling thing to me is, and I should have had the article up, I think it was one of the linebackers said that, we're going to come out fast, and we know Ohio State's going to come out fast, but if we can hang with them in the first quarter, and we can hang and hang and hang, eventually the Purdue game is going to seep into their heads, and they're going to start to doubt themselves. Tom, there is no way that comes from a player saying that. That comes from Scott Frost telling his team that. That comes from what he has seen from Ohio State. Scott Frost also said this, about the Buckeyes. They were good early in the season. And so he has seen a team that has gotten either mentally weak or physically weak. But he believes, and he has told his team this, if we stay in it early, the doubt is going to creep into the Ohio State minds, and they're going to start to question themselves, and that's where we can make plays and we can get big shots in there, and that's where we can get the momentum. And I don't know that I disagree with him.
This is one of the old Marge Simpson, it's true, but you shouldn't say it kind of things. Yes, Scott Frost was very careful to say all the right things during his portion of the interviews, but you're right. I mean, there's that is coming from somewhere. That is not a player just making that up on his own. That is something they've probably talked about, and I don't know what you would say to argue, because that has certainly been what we've seen. That you hit him in the mouth, and there's a little bit of a lack of confidence, a lack of, we have in over the last couple of years heard them players talk about not necessarily trusting that other people are going to do their jobs, and people trying to do too much and trying to not just do their job but try and do someone else's job, and how that can create an issue. I think you would be crazy to not think that is going on at least a little bit right now, and that's what makes this weekend so fascinating, because this game could go so many different ways. This game could go like the Michigan State game last year did, where Ohio State comes out, asserts its will, and just absolutely crushes a team that's not as talented, but not Bethune-Cookman. This is a team that should be able to, at least they should be able to beat this team 38-17 or something like that, and that would be a very reasonable result. There's a way that Ohio State comes out and wins this game 56-10, and there's a way that Ohio State comes out and makes this a 60-minute game and gives up a whole bunch of points, and then everyone freaks out. And I don't know what to expect. I was just thinking about the predictions for this weekend, and I may go back to a pancake recipe, because I feel like whatever I pick, I'm going to be off by 40 points.
Yeah. I think the only thing I know is I got to get off of these blowouts, because you just look terrible when you keep predicting blowouts, and it's a nail biter, and we never get to see Tate Martell. The thing, if Ohio State they believe they've made all of these fixes, and you play in the first quarter and the first two quarters, and those fixes aren't working, then I think the doubt really starts to sink in. Because then it's like, well, what the hell were we doing? Like, what have we been working on? What have we fixed? It's all been wasted time, and now your head starts spinning a little bit more. And I think there's potential here, because I believe the Nebraska offense can do what the Purdue offense did. They've got those skill players, and they have a quarterback who is, I'd say, the way David Blau played last week, Adrian Martinez can throw the ball as well as David Blau, but he can also run it much better. So in some ways, even though there is no Rondale Moore, there is a J.D. Spielman, there is a Stanley Morgan, this might be a more dangerous offense. And when you say that, like, I think there is potential for danger here, but what you have to keep going back to is Nebraska also has to play defense. And so we might be in for take the over type of game.
I've thought that a whole bunch of weeks in a row, and it hasn't necessarily always played out that way. But as far as the Nebraska offense being comparable to the Purdue offense, Jordan Fuller was asked about that. He was asked to kind of compare what the teams do, and he said, every college football offense is kind of the same. They try and spread you out and try and beat you one-on-one. So if that's the case, if that's what they're just going to see for the rest of the year, I think you're going to have a pretty good sense pretty early on Saturday. This is like the old axiom about summer training camp. You can't win the Super Bowl in training camp, but you can lose the Super Bowl in training camp. Ohio State can't show that they're going to win the Big Ten and make the college football playoff on Saturday. But if they come out and look bad and give up another 30 points to Nebraska, I think they probably will have shown you that they can't win the Big Ten on Saturday.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If Ohio State comes out and it's like 14-0 in the first quarter Buckeyes, with Nebraska putting so much weight on that first quarter, I wonder if then they collapse a little bit. But I know right now Scott Frost believes his team will still fight through it. But I think there is a little bit of danger in putting so much weight on that first quarter. But the way the Buckeyes have struggled of late, maybe it's not so much of a concern because you don't think much of their offense. And you look at defenses around the Big Ten, probably even though there's a lot of talent on the Ohio State offense, I don't know that the running game concerns them, or maybe it's just the offensive line that doesn't concern them because the individual pieces, the skill players certainly have to. But it's just interesting to, and it's not the first time, but to listen to opposing coaches talk with, almost confidence about one side of the ball or the other for the Buckeyes. And I think that's something that the Ohio State coaches need to be aware of too, and that they need to take note of. They talk about self-scouting. There's also like, well, what are other teams saying about us, and why are they saying it so confidently? But these are also things that they should know doing that self-scouting, that, we have areas of concern here, we have areas of concern there, but, they haven't really done anything to shore them up until maybe this week. We'll see. Do you, how confident are you that defensively the problems have been fixed on a scale of 1 to 10?
Thinking about this in terms of how percentage confident am I that the defense is going to give up, say, 17 points or fewer on Saturday?
Right, a normally good defense.
I would say about 25%, maybe 30% if I'm being optimistic. My concern from an Ohio State perspective would be there are so many different issues. It's not just that the tackling has to get fixed. It's also that you have probably some schematic issues. You may have some personnel issues. It does not sound like, from what they've said so far, it does not sound like any kind of sweeping personnel changes are on the way. And that's it. We have answered that question a couple times about how many changes there would be over the bye week, and I don't get the sense that there's a lot of change coming there. So, I mean, maybe there's big progress, but I think the odds are stacked against this suddenly looking like what you normally would think of as an Ohio State defense. I think there's room for improvement, but they can improve a whole lot and still not be a very good Ohio State defense. They can improve a whole bunch and just be an okay-ish defense.
Yeah, I'm looking over the depth chart for the Nebraska game, and as you might expect, there are no changes at all. And not that, the reason I didn't even think to look at it until now is because there have been no changes. And Ryan Day said last Wednesday, that they weren't talking about any offensive line changes. And you wrote about the possibility of that coming down soon once Brandon Bowen and Brady Taylor are able to play. Urban Meyer said they might be good to go this week, even though Ryan Day last week said no, they wouldn't be. I don't know which head coach to believe there. But, I guess you go with the latest information. Just watching this team, you get the feeling like if there aren't personnel changes, I don't know how much improvement there is going to be. Schematically, some things might help. Refocus on fundamentals might help. But how long does that attitude change on the offensive line last? Does it last just for the first quarter? Does it just last for the Nebraska game? You've gone this far without being able to get the attitude that you want, and you suddenly install it in a week. How long does it last? And I have questions about that. We've talked before about Michael Jordan at center and whether that's his ideal position. I thought it was interesting on Monday. Urban Meyer was asked about Michael Jordan and having to move him. And there was such a pregnant pause. He might have waited like 5 or 6 seconds, like mulling over in his mind what he was going to say before he started to say it. And you could tell, like, well, some of it's been good, some of it's not been good, but it was almost a move of desperation because Brady Taylor, they didn't feel he was there yet, or he got injured over the summer, and they didn't feel Myers was quite there yet. So you wonder, like, if Brady Taylor would have been healthy, would we have this issue now? I don't know. I still feel kind of like it's not just one guy on the offensive line that sets the tone. The entire offensive line has to set the tone, and I don't know that one guy fixes it. Now you lose Jamarco Jones and Billy Price last year, and that was a big dent. I don't know if Brady Taylor makes up for it. I think it would help, but I don't know if he's one of the best five.
What Urban said, and the pause was 7 seconds at the beginning of that answer. I went back and watched the video because I included that in that article on Taylor and Bowen I wrote. But he said Taylor suffered the knee injury in summer camp, which was not the way it had been. That's the first time we actually heard that. No one had actually said that, and someone had to kind of ask a follow-up question to get that confirmed. So it did sound like it was an injury issue with Taylor that kept him out. So maybe having him at center and Jordan at guard helps and improves the offense. I don't think it solves every problem, but I think it probably helps. If he was one of the best five before that knee injury and then he couldn't play because of the knee injury, then yes, obviously you've got a couple, you've got a guy playing out of position in Jordan, and you've got someone who was not originally part of that best five now on the offensive line. So that's certainly a concern. And you got to remember, Brandon Bowen last year beat out Demetrius Knox for that right guard job, and then broke his leg against Maryland, I believe, and then was out for the year, and then had another setback this summer, and had to have kind of a follow-up surgery earlier this fall. So if Brandon Bowen was better than Demetrius Knox last fall, there's a chance he's better than Demetrius Knox this year. If Brady Taylor was one of the five best over the summer, which was certainly what it sounded like was what Urban Meyer was implying, then that's a chance to improve that unit a little bit with either of those guys. But you're right. I still don't think that necessarily gets them to, the absolute, classic Wisconsin road grader kind of offense where they can just mash people and run for 6 yards a carry. But it probably, an extra yard and a half per carry at this point would be a big difference. If they could just go from 3 to 4.5 per carry, 4.5 per carry would have been a pretty lousy average for most of Urban Meyer's teams. But compared to this year, that would make a night and day difference.
I guess what he needs is an offensive lineman who is a dual threat quarterback.
Tate Martell for left guard.
All right, let's get to listener questions. And
all right, we have a nice smooth transition here to the first one. It's from @Plessinger3. Do you believe Urban when he says you can't make any major schematic changes to fix the run game this late into the season?
I believe that Urban Meyer cannot make any major schematic changes this late into the season because the type of quarterback he has, we've seen, like, it just, for whatever reason, it does not fit what he likes to do with the running game. And you're not going to, the major change that you would make here would seemingly be you take out Dwayne Haskins, and that's not going to happen. I don't know. Do you believe him when he says it? The fact that, I tend to believe a Hall of Fame head coach when he talks to me about what he can and can't accomplish because he is a head coach. I'm just some guy. That's how I generally react to these sort of things. But I also don't think that Dwayne Haskins is the type of quarterback that gives Urban Meyer a good shot at running the ball.
I believe him in that you're not going to completely overhaul your offense and just start running the flexbone triple option this year, this week. That's not, you can't completely scrap your offense and do something totally different. they're not going to come out in I formation on Saturday. You can't install all of that in the span of 2 weeks. That's not reasonable. But I do think that they had in this 2 week span plenty of time to manipulate personnel in a way that could maybe make some variant of the existing scheme work a lot better. And whether that's Tate Martell in short yardage or the J.K. Dobbins, Mike Weber backfield that it seems like we've been talking about for 18 months now, I think that there are things they could do that would make a pretty substantial change and pretty substantial impact. I think that there has to be a little bit of a concern if they kind of come out and just are doing the same stuff again and it's maybe working a little better. I think that has to be a concern because there are things they could do to improve things. And if they're going to be stubborn about it and try and keep throwing rock, I mean, that was the analogy I used about the defense a couple weeks ago, but there's to some degree that's true on offense as well. If they're going to be stubborn and not make personnel changes and just say, well, we just have to do it harder. We have to do it better. Yeah, maybe, but if it was that simple to fix, you probably would have fixed it by now. So I'm going to be real interested. But to circle back to the question, yes, you can make some changes, but you're not going to completely overhaul your offense in 2 weeks. I think that's kind of what he was talking about.
Yeah, and he did say that there have been some changes made, but that also they just need to be more aggressive up front and at running back. But they have come up with some tweaks, so we'll see when they show up and if we even spot them when they do.
Another one from Plessinger 3. Being that we're coming off a big loss, what are the top 3 losses by Ohio State that affected you the most? 1998 Michigan State is always the worst for him.
Yeah, for me, it just goes back to my college days. It would be 95 Michigan, 96 Michigan, and 97 Michigan State. 98 Michigan State, rather. That's always the worst. It will always be the worst. I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Those are the exact same 3 I had. And that's a function of, the Michigan thing obviously was haunting back in the 90s, and the 98 Michigan State game was about the most inexplicable loss you've ever seen.
Such a good Ohio State team.
That was so much worse than any. I mean, that is so much worse than giving up 55 to Iowa or 49 to Purdue because it was at home. There was just no reason for it, and it remains the most inexplicable loss I think I've ever seen. The Michigan thing, it was like, well, it's Michigan. This is what Cooper does. So there was an explanation there. So those 3 really stand out to me. But I mean, I think there's also probably an element of this that once you start covering the team, you get a lot less emotionally invested in the team. Those 3, I made my list and then started thinking about it, and I started covering the team in 2000 with John Cooper's last year. And as soon as you do that, I don't know if it's you see how the sausage is made or you're just so busy during the games. I mean, when we're up in the press box during the game, half the time we're talking about what are we going to write about, how are we going to do this. We're getting photos together for post-game stories. We're planning out who's going to ask what questions, who are we going to target, what are we going to write, and so you're not emotionally invested in the game because you're working. It would be like if you're at work watching the game on TV. And, you work at a hospital. You're a nurse working at a hospital, and you're watching the game on TV, and you're doing your job, but then you're also kind of looking up and watching the game on TV. You're not as emotionally invested in it. So
I would say
there's a lot of that.
I would say more along the lines of like surgery. It's a lot like that, where imagine being a surgeon. It's kind of like covering a game and trying to focus and do all of these things. And now you've got a game on. It's very, very similar to a very, like I would say, brain surgery or perhaps eyeball surgery. Just, something very intricate. I'm not the only person who's ever said that, probably. What do you think about...
We both graduated from Hollywood upstairs journalism school, so I think it's a very appropriate analogy.
How do you feel about the 2003 Wisconsin loss versus the 2003 Michigan loss? Because for me, the Wisconsin loss was more devastating or costly or just, even though it was the Michigan game that really knocked them out of the national title hunt, that Wisconsin loss, that was the end of the winning streak, and it was just it had been so long since the Buckeyes had lost. For me, that's a more significant loss than the Michigan game.
I told that story on one of the shows we did over the summer when we were talking about road trips and that kind of stuff. I made the road trip to Wisconsin for that game, and that was the single worst road trip of my life. So if you want to hear me talk about just being cold, wet, and miserable and wearing a garbage bag at the end of a loss, go back and listen to our summer road trip show from probably July earlier this year. For sure, the Wisconsin game was worse in terms of just the shock that, oh my goodness, they actually lost, because it certainly seemed like that was setting up all game to be one of those classic gross trestle ball 13-10 kind of wins. And Chris Gamble bid on the out and up to Lee Evans, and it felt like 85 yards thinking back. I have no idea how long that pass actually was, but it was a long touchdown late in the game, and it was just like, oh my goodness, how did that?
With the backup quarterback?
That sounds right.
Schaubert?
Yep. So, yep. So yeah, that was kind of a shock. The Michigan game that year was unfamiliar to see them lose. It was strange to see them lose, but it was particularly strange because of how they lost. They fell down 21-0 in the first half of that game, and then came back, and it was like, oh, they're actually going to do this. They fell down 21-0. They came back to cut it to 28-21. But Craig Krenzel had gotten hurt. I don't remember what the injury was, but Craig Krenzel got hurt, and Granville, Ohio native Scott McMullen came in and looked like he was going to save the day, and then threw a pass to, I think it was Bam Childress. I just looked at these pictures from this game this week for a project I was working on, so I think it was Bam Childress. And the ball got tipped up in the air and picked off by, I believe, Ernest Shazier, the Michigan safety. See, I mean, this sounds way impressive, like I have an incredible memory, but it was literally 2 days ago I went through all of the pictures from that game, so I should remember this way more than I do, but I don't. So, but yeah, just the way they lost that game, they came back, and it was this kind of inspiring comeback that they had fallen way behind and almost dug themselves out of it, and then lost. That one kind of felt like the 1997 loss to me, where they dug themselves this huge first half hole, and then almost came back to win, but didn't.
And Michigan was a 7-point favorite in that one as well, so it wasn't as unexpected. Although once I saw it raining for that Wisconsin game, I knew then that the Buckeyes were going to have a tough time because they couldn't run the ball, and now you've got the rain to deal with Craig Krenzel. So, yeah, those were two others, but they don't compare to what happened in the 90s.
All right, next one from @Brown66, and Brown has an E on the end if you're interested in following on Twitter. Should OSU go with the Wildcat with Dobbins and Weber in the red zone? Could making the change be any worse than the current running game? I'll take the second half of that. Nope. No, it could not be worse than the current OSU running game. Gerd, we've kind of talked about the first half, but you want to answer that in a little more detail?
Yeah, I mean, the Buckeyes have failed to score a touchdown on their last 8 trips to the red zone. Against the 4 best teams on the schedule, they are 2 of 14. Should they go to the Wildcat? I mean, it is essentially the quarterback power that they went with JT. So I don't know why now you can't, I don't know that they'd want to do it from the 20 on, and not, you wouldn't need to, but I don't know why they won't do it. There's the thought that it's too predictable, but there was nothing more predictable last year than 3rd and short, 4th and short. JT Barrett comes out and 5 wide, and everybody gets spread out. Then he waves the tight end on over, and Rashad or Marcus Ball would come on in to be one extra blocker, take the snap, and he'd run and pick up the first down. I don't know why you can't do that with J.K. Dobbins or Mike Weber. And not just in the red zone, but in any short yardage situation. We've talked about Tate Martell in the red zone. There's this this dance you have to do with you don't want to take Dwayne Haskins out of the game. And I think maybe that's easier to do with the Wildcat than putting another quarterback in there. And not that, he's going to do what he's told to do, but maybe that would be easier for him to handle. But in the end time, it doesn't matter what he can handle or not. You've got to get in the end zone. And if that's Tate Martell or if that's J.K. Dobbins, if it's not Dwayne Haskins, it has to be somebody else.
Well, I mean, this goes back to the second half of the question, which is how much worse could they get? Here are the gains on the rushes they had in the red zone against Purdue. Ready? 0, 1, 1, 5. If you want to shake your pom-poms for a second, 5. That was 5. -1 and 2. So that was 1.5 yards per carry in the red zone on 6 carries. So that's not that's not a huge sample, but they didn't rip off one, and it wasn't like the 5 yards was because they had to go 5 yards and that's all they got. That's 5 out of 6 times they got basically stuffed. So you have to try something. This is, of all the things that I don't understand about this year's team, this seems like the easiest fix, and I don't understand why they haven't done it yet. It seems like it would be relatively simple to implement. They have talked about having Weber and Dobbins in the backfield and practicing that going back to the end of last season. That was something they talked about after the Cotton Bowl, that they had practiced a whole bunch of plays with Weber and Dobbins in the backfield and then hadn't actually run them in the Cotton Bowl.
They both played Wildcat last year. At least J.K. Dobbins did.
Yeah, I don't understand why there's this hesitance. And if it's not something you really think you're going to use, put it on film and make teams prep for it. Like that's something that just make them waste practice time. Show it 2 times, and if you don't think you're really going to use it. But it seems like such an easy thing to just try, because I mean, like the question said, like how much worse could it get? You can't do worse basically than 1.5 yards per carry. I mean, what's the worst that happens? They average 1 yard per carry. It just give it a try. I don't understand the issue there. Next question from @burner_ACCT 69. So burner count 69. Over under Master Teague carries on Saturday 1/2.
Yeah, I'm going under, Tom. Until I see a freshman or a super backup, a third stringer or a second string quarterback on the field, I'm just going to assume every game is going to be close from here on out. And like my score, I probably won't even, maybe 7 points separate the two teams. I'm at this point, no more blowouts, no more, this freshman's going to score this week. This guy's going to do this. And Master Teague, has he played in 5 games yet? I don't think so. And not that they're even looking at that right now. But yeah, I'm going under. I don't see it. Plus, you need to get J.K. and Mike Weber. You need to get them going. And I guess if it's a blowout, you don't need to play them. But like I said, I'm off the blowout train.
That's where I am as well. I would take the under until you see otherwise. Because taking the over means you think they're going to be up by 28 points or something like that. And I mean, that involves the offense putting up a whole bunch of points and scoring in the red zone, and it involves the defense not giving up a whole bunch of points. And one of those can improve, but if one of those improves, I don't know if that improves them enough to get to the point where they're winning by 28 or 38-5 points on Saturday. Master Teague's last carry was against Tulane. So that's it's been a minute. That was September 22nd.
Has he been suspended like Brian Snead?
I don't think so. Although, how would we know? I mean, he's been on the sidelines, so that's how we know. But yeah, it's. I don't recall if he's played on special teams or not. I feel like I've seen him on one of the kick coverage units, so they're probably not going to redshirt him. But if you're just going by the offensive snaps, they still could, which is not something I expected to say at the beginning of the year. He's 17 carries, 106 yards, 6.2 yards per carry, 1 touchdown.
You're saying he should be starting.
That is what other conclusion could you draw? Yeah, that is. I think we set the over/under for him at somewhere around 250 yards at the beginning of the season, and to get there, that requires him to be a lot higher than 106 yards at this point of the year, because you were mentally giving him yards against Indiana and Minnesota and Purdue, and none of those things happened. So that's I would until you see him, I would not expect to see him. From Buck the World, if Joe Burrow takes down Bama, will Buckeye Nation explode or implode?
I'm going with explode because obviously they're still rooting for Joe Burrow, but I don't think it's to the point where, although maybe I'm completely wrong, where they would be lamenting the fact that they are stuck with Dwayne Haskins, because there's no such thing as being stuck with Dwayne Haskins. If anything, you're stuck with Urban Meyer, which is an even stupider thing to say. You're just stuck with, chocolate and toothpaste, two things that you need to live, but together they're like, these aren't great things. And I guess that's what Urban Meyer and Dwayne Haskins are. Whereas Urban Meyer and Joe Burrow, they're chocolate and peanut butter, which, two great things that go great together. But now Joe Burrow being peanut butter is an LSU with crawfish, and apparently I don't know, maybe they go, I don't know, do they go good together? You got some weird people down there, but I think there are some Buckeye fans who wish Joe Burrow was at Ohio State, and we've talked here that would they be undefeated with Joe Burrow? Maybe not, but I still think that people would just be happy to see Alabama lose, and then you worry about the repercussions of what this could have meant for the Buckeyes later on. Just like when Michigan loses on a botched punt in 2015 and it costs Ohio State, a playoff berth or whatever. You worry about that later on. You just enjoy the moment at that point.
Right. There's a very compelling argument to be made that the best possible scenario for Ohio State in terms of the college football playoff is Alabama winning out and just completely erasing everyone they play, just to get rid of any chance that you have two SEC teams in the playoff. I mean, that's probably not going to happen. Alabama probably wins out and takes care of that. But if LSU wins this game and wins out, and Alabama then wins the rest of their games, you could absolutely see that happening. But I don't think LSU is going to do it this weekend. Joe Burrow has been a great story this fall, but his stats have been not particularly impressive. He's been around 50% completion percentage in most of his games. I'll just read them down. 45.8, 50, 44.1, 57.1, 72. That was against Ole Miss, who basically has the worst defense in football. 55.9, 50, and 57.1. So he's been not been doing a whole lot and just kind of making a couple big plays here and there. So I think we discussed this a week or two ago, and I think we basically settled on Ohio State probably would not be undefeated with Joe Burrow. They would be maybe 7-1. They might have lost a different game, but they would probably be 7-1 or worse because Joe Burrow doesn't actually fix any of the problems on the other side of the ball. And the passing offense is probably not as good. The running offense is probably a little better, but he doesn't, he can't play safety. He can't play linebacker. He doesn't solve all the problems that they have.
He played safety in high school. Don't sell him short.
Just play both ways. Iron Man football. If Joe Burrow played Iron Man football, then Ohio State would definitely be 8-0.
I agree.
All right, next one from Ubidis. Thoughts on aggressive pressure defense? Is it worth it anymore? Holding is practically legal with offensive line now. Grounding is legal as well if outside the box, and you have to be so careful as to not to hit the quarterback. One late hit may negate whatever lost yardage accumulated during the game. Shiano was a defensive coordinator with Miami when it was all the rage, but not the risk it is worth it anymore.
I think there's some validity here, but Urban Meyer, we've seen him tear his hair out watching a passive defense, and I think he's come to the conclusion that he doesn't want that. But I agree, there's arguments to be made for it, the whole bend but don't break type of thing. Instead of the break, don't bend. But do the rules that the way they are now, punish or not reward aggressive defense? I just think the way the game is right now, it's so difficult to defend because it's spread out and you've got the RPO stuff and the options that it's hard. You're asking a lot of a defense to turn their backs to the ball so often playing man as opposed to playing a zone where they can maybe see the ball more of the time. And I just think defensive football is really hard right now. So, whether it's aggressive or bend but don't break, you're still going to give up yards. You're still going to give up points. I mean, just look at the explosion of numbers and scoring that we've seen over the last 15 years. Could they be doing better by not being so aggressive? I think so. But I just think defense is really hard unless you're, Alabama, basically.
Unless you're Alabama or you're playing Ohio State and they're trying to run the ball.
Come on,
Other
Tom.
than that, defense is hard. Your point about the difference between man and zone in terms of guys having their backs to the ball or facing the ball is a good one and an important one that I don't know if people necessarily think about. In man coverage, if you're a defensive back, you're chasing the wide receiver down the field and you're looking at the wide receiver. I mean, as Ohio State fans, you probably have already mentally pictured the defensive back not turning around and looking for the ball. So that's good. Now we're on the same page. In zone, if you're a linebacker, you take your drop and you're looking in front of you. You're looking at the quarterback. You're looking at the receivers. You're not turning your back and running away from the quarterback where you have, if someone's running the ball, if they hit an underneath pass, you wouldn't necessarily realize it as a defensive back covering a wide receiver streaking down the sideline because you're still facing the other way. You have a kind of a delayed reaction. That's an important point. And I mean, Greg Schiano has been very insistent. We're a press man team. We're a press man team. We're a press man team. And that's their identity. But their identity is also a team that gives up a whole bunch of yards this year. So that's another thing. I mean, we talked about maybe they've been a little stubborn on offense. I think they've been very stubborn on defense. And it's going to be real interesting to see what schematic changes they've made, because it doesn't sound like there's a whole bunch of personnel changes coming. So what schematic changes they've made on defense to potentially address some of the issues they're having. Because football is a very cat and mouse game. The offenses develop something new, and then the defenses change to address it, and then the offenses develop something else new, and then the defenses change to address that. And I don't know that Ohio State has done a great job keeping up with what's being thrown at them, because they think they have their identity, but their identity is not working particularly well right now. Next one from Iron Mike. Do current problems with the running game reflect that the offensive line was tailored to emphasize long-armed pass protectors rather than powerful drive blockers?
I think this goes to this is another way of asking if the offensive line is too tall to run block. And that's a question that I asked Greg Stadrawa, and he said no. But I think it's interesting, the whole long arm thing being a trait for pass blockers, and the run blockers you want, maybe more compact, but you could still be a plenty good run blocker being a 6'7" offensive tackle. Orlando Pace did it. Corey Stringer did it. And I'm sure Orlando Pace would have been fine being a left guard too, doing it. So I think you should be able to run block, with an 8-foot wingspan just as well as a 6-foot wingspan. So I understand the question and the wording of it, but I mean we've seen evidence that tall guys can do just fine, long arm guys can do just fine. Right now, it's the trait that is holding the offensive line back at Ohio State is not the length of their arms, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of stuff you can chalk it up to. I don't think that that's something that is prohibitive to you being a good run blocker. I think there may be issues elsewhere, would be my short answer on that. Next one from @Fairfax Buckeye. Why are Ohio State fans so negative, and how does it affect the program? I read this question, and this phrase immediately popped into my mind, and it's clever enough that I must be stealing it from somewhere, but I don't know where it is. Happiness is the difference between your expectations and your results. And so if your expectation is, my team is going to go 6-6 this year, and you go 9-3, you're ecstatic. If you're expecting your team to go 12-0 and your team goes 10-2, you're miserable. And Ohio State fans came into this year with the expectation that they're going to go 11-1 or 12-0 and make the college football playoff and potentially be a national championship kind of team. Right now, they've already lost that one game, and it certainly looks like they're in danger of losing potentially another one or maybe two this year. So when your expectation is 12-0 and you end up worried that you may end up at 11-1 or 10-2 or maybe worse than that in the worst case scenario, then that sets you up to be pretty miserable. There are lots of teams that would love to be where Ohio State is right now, but they didn't come into the year with those expectations.
I also think that people more than ever are just plain negative. So, you combine that aspect of people right now with sports, which just plays into it, and you've got the social media and the people on their My Faces and their Snapchats and whatnots that Jim Tressel would talk about, but a lot of that stuff is just a breeding ground for anger and negativity. And then, I don't know, out walking in the street, are Buckeye fans as negative as they are, on the internet? Tom, when you, do you, the Buckeye fans I interact with, outside of the internet would be, family members, and they're only asking me what's wrong. Not they're not Myers got to go, Haskins sucks. I what segment of the fan base specifically are we talking about that is so negative? Because I know that that's the way the internet is as well, but I don't know that just regular Joes on the street, if they are that negative. I know they can't be happy or thrilled, I should say, but you should be. I can't say you should be happy right now with the way things are going. But are the regular people out on the street as negative as the ones on the internet? And not everybody on the internet is just negative, but I think that's where you see most of it. Or we are an internet site, so that's where our focus is. And you've got Twitter, and we're on Twitter, and so that's where we see the negativity. I guess I don't interact with enough people in the real world to know if they are as upset as the people that I interact with.
I think there's probably a few different segments of the fan base, and the general correlation is the closer you pay attention, the more upset you are this year, would be my guess. That there's probably, 40 or 50% of Ohio State fans are people who, watch the games, look at, watch most of the games, look at the scores. Hey, they won again. That's good. They're 7-0. That's great. And that's probably a decent chunk of the fan base. That's not the people who are going to road games. They may go to a game, one game a year, or go to a spring game or something like that. And they're good Ohio State fans, and I'm not taking anything away from them, but they're not obsessive. There are millions of Ohio State fans who probably do not spend their weeks reading articles and listening to podcasts about the team. That's just a reality. And those people are probably reasonably happy with this season. Oh, the worst. If only we could get just half of them. Millionaires, I'll tell you, millionaires. Then there's the segment that watches the games, goes to a couple games, listens to sports radio maybe, or reads articles, and is probably a little more upset, but doesn't necessarily know exactly. These are the people who know who the coordinators are, probably know who a number of the position coaches are, but don't know, everything that the people who are the most invested in the team do. And if you are listening to a podcast like this, you are probably in the top 5 or 10%, I would guess, of Ohio State fans in their intensity of fandom. If you care enough to listen to us every
top
week,
1%,
and you should, because by listening to us, you are proving that you are the best. So just think about that, and then tell your friends and ask them if they also want to be the best. That's, I think, the big takeaway here. But I think that if you spend a lot of time thinking about it and a lot of time reading about it and a lot of time listening to people talk about it and posting on the message boards or posting on Twitter, the more you think about it, the more there is to kind of nitpick with the team. And when you come in with the expectations that this team had, everything you're nitpicking is, well, this won't work against Alabama. And if your expectations are the national championships, then yep, that's something you're going to have to worry about at some point. It's not something you had to worry about in the beginning, the middle of September, after the Rutgers game or after the TCU game. You really didn't need to be worrying about Alabama yet, but you're getting to November now, so now you got to start thinking about Michigan, about Michigan State, about a theoretical Big Ten championship game against whoever it ends up coming out of the West. That's kind of a mess right now. And then if you get through all of those, then you do have to worry about Alabama, because maybe you're the 4 seed, and then you got to play Alabama in the probably the Cotton Bowl, I'm guessing, would be where Alabama would choose to go. So that's coming in a month and, well, almost 2 months now, but that's coming in the span of 6 games from now. That's who they'd be playing. So it's coming up. So if that's the expectation, then they have not lived up to that. And if you've been paying close enough attention all year, you've been listening to us talk about, hey, this has not been great. They should think about changing these things. And you haven't necessarily seen those changes implemented. You haven't seen the results on the field improve dramatically. You've seen them regress in some cases. And that has to lead to frustration. I think that's certainly part of it. Next one from Blue Sky Buckeye. Which came first, missed tackles or poor defensive alignment / scheme?
Yeah, I'd say they're at the same time, because you've got you're putting poor tacklers in, I guess, a defensive scheme that doesn't suit them. And although, even by putting them closer to the ball, like the linebackers, maybe you're taking away their inability to miss tackles because they can't get to the ball. So maybe that's a good thing. But I don't think there's one before the other. They're simultaneous, and like Greg Schiano says, it's never just one thing. And yeah, I don't think there is a first. I think they both coexist, and that's why you're giving up 49 points or 42 points to Purdue, and you're giving up 40-odd 20-yard plays, and all of these different 93-yard plays and 80-yard plays, and it's both at the same time, in my opinion, Tom.
Yeah, I think there's probably something to that. In general, you didn't have the missed tackles for the first part of the year, so I guess in that way it's scheme and alignment. But yeah, I mean they do sort of go hand in hand, because if you're in position to make a tackle, it's much easier to make kind of a form tackle. And if you're out of position and you're kind of reaching, that's when you get a lot of broken arm tackles. So there's something to that for sure. Last one from Couchburner. Do you think the local coverage is fair? Am I wrong to believe the press is anti-Urban and laying in wait, trying to trip him up, to embarrass him, or otherwise hurt the program?
Yeah, there's no, the local coverage is not lying in wait to hurt Urban or to hurt the program. When we ask questions, many times it's because these are questions that are being asked of us by you, or we see what's being talked about on the message board, so you get a feel for what people want to know about and what they want to read about. Lying in wait, like, I don't know if this is about asking about Urban's health. That's we get that question more from people on the outside than any other question, I think, right now, because the TV shows him an awful lot on the sidelines. And, he's come out and talked about his cyst that he's had to deal with and the headaches. But, Tom, there's nobody on the beat out to get Urban, even though there's nothing better for business than a coaching controversy. That's just not how you operate on a beat. at least at Ohio State, this is the only beat I've ever known. And maybe there are other beats where you got some real jerks or whatever who are only in it for themselves, and we're all in it for ourselves. But nobody's trying to trap a coach or trap a player. We're just trying to cover a team, and the the environments are so controlled at Ohio State generally anyway that it's kind of difficult to trap somebody because you don't get enough follow-ups in to like fully like pull the string and trap them with your box trap or whatever. I mean you don't I mean I don't see this as being an adversarial, like anybody out to get Urban type of thing.
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think if you go back to the summer and you want to look at reporters who may have had an agenda, it was not a local reporter who was putting quotes from Urban in his Twitter bio and pictures from the pro-Urban rally as his Twitter header. That was not a local person. I don't think there's an agenda anywhere. I think there is a accurately report the stories. And right now, Urban Meyer's health is a story. I mean, like you said, that is something we get asked about. So a reporter asks about it because it's a story, and you can't ignore it. Being a reporter is not the same as being a PR person. That is not the same job. The PR person's job is to make the program look as best as possible at all times. That's not what our job is. Our job is to report, here's what's going on. Here's the information that you guys are interested in. We are getting it for you and we're presenting it to you. That's what our job is. And sometimes that information is not the same information that the PR people would want put out. That's how it is. They're different jobs, and we understand what their job is and we respect it, and they understand what our job is and they respect it. And I think there's a cordial working relationship between them, but we're not always on the same team necessarily. That's not how it is. So I do not think though that there's anyone in that room on the beat that is actively trying to trip him up or embarrass him or is strongly anti-Urban or anything like that. I mean, you can let me see if I can do this without naming any names, but making it identifiable enough that people will know who I'm talking about. There is a longtime Cleveland and Columbus radio host who has probably for 2 decades kind of made his name for being sort of the anti-OSU radio guy and former newspaper guy. That is a gig that is out there, but that's not someone who's on the beat right now. That's someone who just, I think, has a radio show. I'm not sure. I think the coverage has been quite fair locally. I mean, it is not universally positive, but the coverage is of what's happening, and what's happening has not been universally positive this year. There's been a whole bunch of stuff that has not gone right on and off the field, and so it's going to get covered. I think if you look outside the program or outside of the Ohio State fan base, I think there's probably a perception that this beat and probably a lot of other beats is, if anything, more more in favor of than anti. I think that's probably the perception of just about every beat. That US I don't know if USC is a great example right now because they're kind of imploding, but Michigan reporters right now are probably, I don't think you're going to find a lot of strongly anti-Jim Harbaugh people covering Michigan right now. And that's maybe a function of the economics of things, where the better the team does, the more interested people are, and the better everyone's business does. That's the basic economics of how a lot of this works. So it's not in anyone's best interest in that room for Ohio State to go 3-9. That doesn't benefit anyone who's covering the team. That doesn't mean we are going to actively boost the team and try and make the team better. We're in there to tell you what's going on, and if that's good, we tell you it's good, and if it's bad, we tell you it's bad, And there has been probably more negative this year than there has been in recent years, and that's probably where some of that sentiment, I think, comes from.
Though I do think it's interesting. We a few minutes ago, we talked about why is the fan base so negative. And then the last question is, why is the press anti-urban, or do we think the press is anti-urban? I think it's clear there's quite a bit of negativity surrounding the program right now, from, the Zach Smith stuff to the Purdue loss, going back to the Iowa loss last year, the inability to run the game, run the ball, or stop the run, stop the big plays. There are reasons that we're talking about these things. And maybe it's the fact that we're harping on it every week because it's the same thing every week. And like we talked about after the Purdue game, all of it finally came to a head and cost the Buckeyes a game. But it wasn't something new that we were talking about after Purdue. It's the same thing we kept talking about. And I don't know that it's, that's not all necessarily anti-urban. And maybe I don't know specifically what is anti-urban in Couchburner's mind, but there's no reason to go out, even though this is the most competitive college beat in America, one of the most competitive sports beats in America. It's just, what's the point on, going rogue and trying to, trip somebody up or take somebody down when, okay, you've done that Tuesday, but now Wednesday you still have to do something. Thursday you still have to do something. It's a temporary thing when this beat is never ending. We can write football 365 days a year, and that's still, people would take more of that if they could. So there's no incentive, no long-lasting incentive to be like that, and really no reason. That's not what our job is. Maybe if you want to be the Clay Travis columnist person, and you know what, Tom, I'm thinking there is probably a role for that. I don't know how long the credentials would stay, but there might be something we might want to think about, where one of us just has, like just the standard hot take that everybody knows is coming, but it's negative enough to get shared. And even if you're ridiculed, as long as you're clicking, you're helping.
I think that there's an inherent danger in that model where you end up having to just sort of slowly one up yourself, because saying that someone should be fired one week then leads to, okay, well, he should be beaten the next week, and then I don't know, is it an executable offense? I don't know. Find out next week in week 3 of hottakes.com. It's nice that you don't have that kind of thing going on locally. That's one of the worst developments in media, is that stupid content gets a lot of traffic, so you see people who specialize in stupid content. And there has been recently with Urban Meyer, there has been a bespectacled ESPN college football personality who has made Urban Meyer's going to quit a kind of a drumbeat story. And based on what he has said, there's not actually like sources are telling him it's going to happen. It's just sort of, well, he doesn't look good and it happened before, so he's going to quit at the end of the year. You keep one-upping yourself and doubling down on stuff, and eventually intelligent people tune you out, and then you have a big audience of idiots. So I'm glad to not have a big audience of idiots.
That's something that the ESPN has talked about. Even when Urban Meyer was hired, I have the graphic. I've got a photo of it. Basically, it says, is Ohio State getting Urban Meyer the winner or Urban Meyer the quitter? And this was in 2012. So they could go right back to that, even though, he's had this long tenure at Ohio State. So, and then when Paul Feinbaum talks about it, and it becomes this topic where, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say his name, but when it gets talked about, then we have to ask Urban about it, or somebody has to ask Urban about it, and then everybody writes about it, and it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy of, like click generation, but you still have to cover it because Urban Meyer has talked about it, and you know that's just where we are right now, and it doesn't help that the access that we get is as limited as it is, and so wherever you could get something, you sort of have to survive off of that. But that's not going to change, and it's probably only going to get worse. So, but that's where we are now. Yeah.
We've had 2 more questions come in on Twitter since we started recording, so I think we should answer those just so we don't have to carry them over to next week's mailbag. Right. First one from @BenZimmer2323. Will the 2 weeks of practice bring the change we were all looking for? Bob Landers in his fullback in the red zone. How many carries will he get? Over under 2 touchdowns for him this weekend. You know what? Over. YOLO.
I'm going to push. I think 2 is all you need. You don't need to get fancy. You don't need to get carried away. You don't want to take away from Dwayne Haskins' Heisman, push. Good question, though. Good question.
Why would you worry about Dwayne Haskins' Heisman push when you could clearly be making a Bob Landers Heisman push? We're not supposed to root for things as impartial media, but let's make that happen. And finally from @PoisonLenny, PoisonLennyy. He says, rank the Simpsons Halloween episodes. I'm assuming this is a response to the article I wrote today that referenced the Paul Anka Treehouse of Horror episode. Do you have we won't rank them, but do you have a favorite Simpsons Halloween Treehouse of Horror segment or episode that pops out to you?
I would have to go through and refresh my memory, but one of my favorites is when Homer is sent to hell with his punishment being eating donuts constantly forever, and it's just he's the happiest he's ever been. He's being fed these donuts on a conveyor belt, and he's just saying more. That's a good one. And the anytime Kang and Kodos show up is a good time too. What about you?
I'm all about The Shining, the episode that was the parody of The Shining, where they let's bask in the television's warming glow. That one's hard to forget. I'm Googling furiously right now. That was the one you referenced was Treehouse of Horror 4. The Shining was Treehouse of Horror 5. And that was the same one as Nightmare Cafeteria, which is the one where they're doing the Soylent Green thing with the kids, and they're feeding. Uter disappears, and they have schnitzel the next day. Yeah, that one's a good one. And Kang and Kodos was the one where they Kang and Kodos take the place of Bob Dole and Bill Clinton. That was Treehouse of Horror 7. Mm-hmm. So. Those are all.
Don't blame me.
Those are all I would say.
I voted for Kodos.
I think what could be the better parting words this week as we head into election week? What could possibly be better parting words for us than "Don't blame me"? I voted for Kodos.
Actually, did you see the question from Smartwater? I think we skipped it.
Nope.
I
guess you can read it.
What is the first thing you expect to see on D and see on O that are a direct result of extra time between games? For me, I'll let you think about it. Offensively, the only changes I can expect to see in the running game would be, either 2 tailbacks, 2 backs in there, or Wildcat. I don't, the blocking schemes or anything like that, or I don't even know if I would notice anything more blatantly obvious than that. Defensively, I think just more of the linebackers backing off, which they did against Purdue, but didn't really help. What you should see is better tackling and guys getting to their spots when they need to. For me, those would be the 2 things that I would expect to see offensively and defensively.
Without any kind of material personnel changes on offense, I don't know what else you're going to see differently. Yeah. I mean, it seems like without that, it's kind of, we're going to try harder, and maybe So I don't know that that's going to make a material difference. So yeah, I guess if you're going to see a change, it's going to be something like that on offense. And on defense, maybe Sean Wade at that strong safety position more, and maybe he takes that job full time this week. I don't know. That's the only thing that kind of jumped out to me. Like, yeah, maybe that could happen. I don't know that I'm expecting it, but that would be maybe something that you would notice right away that would kind of jump out at you as something that was kind of a significant change.
I think it was Urban Meyer also last week said Chris Olave, or Ryan Day said Chris Olave was in the mix at X as well with Austin Mack out. So that'll be interesting to see if we see more of him this week. But that wouldn't be, I don't know, that I guess that will be interesting to see who is that X, and is it a full rotation with Ben Victor? There's going to have to be because of the way they run their tempo. And maybe actually getting back to the tempo that they've gone away from because they haven't been able to run the ball. If they can get the ball running again, then they can get their tempo going again, and it kind of feeds off of itself. But we'll see, and then the question becomes, yeah, you did it against Nebraska, but what does it mean? And we won't know until we see it against Michigan State, and then it'll be, Tom, yeah, it was Michigan State, but what does it mean?
If they can run the ball against Michigan State, that would show me something. Michigan State has not been great this year, but Michigan State's run defense has been pretty darn good this year. So if they can run the ball against Michigan State, that would be I would buy in at that point. But you're right. I mean, Nebraska, they can come out and beat Nebraska 42-10, and it's like, well, yeah, maybe, I guess, maybe, but not. You can't, like I said, you can't prove that you are absolutely a legitimate Big Ten title, college football playoff kind of contender, that you fixed all those problems. You can't prove it this week, but if they come out and it looks bad, that'll give you a pretty good indication that this may just not be that year.
Yeah, I think the best thing you could see or get your hopes up for is to see what you should see, which would be a comfortable win. And yeah, that may not mean much, but it means for the first time in a while, the Buckeyes did what they should have done. And that's a step in the right direction.
A comfortable win and post-game pizza in the press box. That's what we should see. Let's see if we see it.
It's almost like you're talking to somebody who may be listening, and you're trying to plant the pizzaception, I guess. But we'll see. We had
I'm just talking to you. I'm just talking to you. I don't know. You're the only one listening right now. Who else is listening?
All right. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Make sure to check out the rest of the shows on the Ozone Radio Network. There's shows every day. They're all good. Plenty of Buckeye talk. And if you're happy, if you're angry, there's a show for everybody. And every show is for you. So take a listen. Make sure you're reading what we're writing. And we will talk to you. We'll do our pregame Saturday morning show. Oh, man, it's going to be an early morning Saturday noon game. I love it. And then we'll do our Facebook Live Saturday morning. We might do a live podcast Saturday morning as well, and all in the same spot. And then, of course, we'll do our post game as well after the game. And we will talk to you then. Thanks for listening.
She threw away the motel key. I wish it never meant nothing to me. Say you will, now say you will. Oh yeah. Say you will, now say you will. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we could steal a car and leave.